Hello, everyone. Welcome to AVAIYA University's Healing from Childhood Trauma. I am Ande Anderson. My partner, Ike Allen, and I are the founders of AVAIYA University and Enlightenment Village. Thanks so much for joining us. And in this event, we are talking with some really incredible fellow experts. We're talking with therapists, doctors, authors, and more about how to help you heal from your experiences of childhood trauma. And today, our guest is going to talk about what do ACEs have to do with childhood trauma? Everything. So please welcome Jane Stevens. Hi, Jane.
Hey, how you doing, Ande? Nice to see you.
I am doing fabulous. It is nice to see you too. And I'm so excited and happy and honored that we were able to make this connection and have you on this event, because what you're doing in the world is paramount to this topic. So I'm so grateful for that. I want to tell everyone a little bit about you and your work before we dive into some questions. So for those of you who don't know Jane, she is the founder and publisher of ACEs Connection, which comprises of the social network ACEs Connection and the news site ACEs Too High. And these sites focus on adverse childhood experiences science and how people are implementing trauma-informed and resilience-building practices based on that science. Jane has been a health, science, and technology journalist for more than 35 years. Her articles have appeared in the Boston Globe, the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Los Angeles Times, National Geographic. She began reporting about the CDC Kaiser Permanente ACE study and the other 4 parts of ACEs sciences in 2005. And she's lived and worked in Kenya and Indonesia. She's also been to Antarctica in the winter, everybody, 3 times on reporting fellowships. So first of all, Burr. Probably a little chilly. So, okay, Jane, let's dive in. So, right, you've been a journalist for more than 40 years now and a science, health, and technology journalist for most of that time. So when do you think the seeds for covering adverse childhood experiences were planted?
So I think probably it started when I was looking into the CDC's approach to covering violence as an epidemic, and that began in the 80s. And the researchers were focusing on why people carried out violence. And one question that I always had is that why does one kid from a family where, that kid might have 3 siblings join a gang and shoot somebody, but the other 3 siblings don't, when they all live in the same neighborhood and had the same parents and grow up the same way? And the epidemiologist said, well, those 3 just escaped. And that just didn't make a lot of sense to me. So fast forward, about 20 years, and then you've got the Adverse Childhood Experiences study. And when I learned about that in 2004, I realized that was the answer, because those other 3 kids didn't escape. They had different manifestations of the stress that they encountered when they were kids. And instead of turning to violence, one might turn to overeating or drinking too much alcohol or drugs or shopping. But it's pretty much the science shows that if you're exposed to those kinds of toxic stress when you're a kid, there's going to be some consequences.
Mm-hmm. So could you, just for our viewers, in case they're not aware of the CDC Kaiser Permanente study, can you just give a brief outline of what that was so that we can, I think that'll help give a little foundation for what we're going to talk about.
Sure. So the Adverse Childhood Experiences study was done by the CDC and Kaiser Permanente in San Diego. And they published their first results in 1998, and they've done 70 publications since then, over almost 20 years. And what that did, in a nutshell, was linked the 10 types of childhood adversity, 5 of which I think probably people wouldn't regard as unusual, but pretty normal. And they looked at what happens to people after they become adults, and they found that these 10 childhood experiences, adverse experiences, led to the adult onset of chronic disease, violence, being a victim of violence, and mental health issues, among a whole bunch of other things. So it was pretty stunning when it came out. And mostly because there was a dose response. So for example, if you had 4 of these types of ACEs, your likelihood of becoming an alcoholic went up 700%. Your likelihood of attempting suicide went up 1,200%. It doubled the risk of cancer and heart disease. It was pretty amazing.
God, I get the chills just thinking about, right? Like such an amazing thing for all of us to be aware of and move forward, with this knowledge. So is there any personal story or reasons as to why you do the work that you do?
Well, it definitely rang not only my science journalist bells, but it also, learning about the ACE study made me realize that what I had gone through as a child really affected my adult life, both in terms of physical and mental health, and just coping with life in general. So I came from a pretty dysfunctional family, and when I learned about the ACE study, it's like, oh, now I understand why I made the decisions I did as when I was growing up. I didn't. Obviously now with great hindsight, and hopefully if I had more resilience factors growing up, my life would have been a lot different than it turned out to be.
Awesome. Got it. Okay. So how did you originally come up with the idea for ACEs Connection?
So I've been a journalist forever and had been doing some work with news organizations to bring them into the 21st century. And in one news organization, we had set up a local health sciences social network, social journalism network, really. And what essentially did, it just let the community put their information in, as well as the information and stories that we were reporting. And the community loved it. And at the same time that the community was doing, or we had started this site, the community had decided to do some kind of a health initiative. And I realized, because I was reporting about ACEs science along the way, that they were never going to achieve their health goals because they weren't incorporating this understanding of ACEs science. So I called the meeting of the advisory group that we had for the site, and I said, I want to tell you about this study because it has everything to do with what you're trying to do. And half the people in there thought it was crazy, and half the people in there said, I don't want to talk about this, it's too scary. And that was when I realized, oh, there are a lot of people out there who are the pioneers in this arena, but they need to be connected. And other people in the world need to know what they're doing. So I decided to, on a wing and a prayer, start ACEs Connection. And it's 2 parts. It's ACEs Too High, which is a news site for the general public, and then ACEs Connection, which is a social journalism network for the ACEs movement, which is growing pretty quickly right now.
Got it. So the ACEs Too High. So I would say the majority of our viewers are people who have struggled with childhood trauma. So if they were to go to ACEs Too High, what do they get to learn, or what resources do they have available to them there?
So ACEs Too High, as I said, is for people who are just learning about all this. And there are a lot of general articles about how what ACEs science is. You can take your ACE score and your resilience score there. You can learn how some of these pioneers are implementing ACEs science in schools, in health clinics, in juvenile justice, detention centers. A lot of there's pretty much now in every sector a pioneer or 2 or 3 or more that are integrating ACEs science into their organizations. ACEs Connection, if people are interested in saying, okay, I want to do something in my community or in my life or my family, or my church, that's a place that you can meet almost 35,000 other people now who are figuring out how to integrate ACEs science into their work. So there are community sites on ACEs Connection. There are about 300 of those now that represent, most of them represent cities, counties, states, and some nations. And then there are interest-based sites like ACEs in Parenting, or Parenting with ACEs, sorry, and ACEs in Pediatrics and ACEs in Education. So that social network, and it is a social network, kind of like Facebook, is really a place, if you want to do something and connect with other people who are doing things, that's the place to go for this.
Awesome. Thank you. What an amazing, what amazing work you've done and are continuing to do. So everybody, just so everyone knows who's watching right now, we have 2 buttons below this video that will link over to ACEs Connection as well as ACEs Too High. So whatever direction you want to go in, or if you want to go in both directions, you can learn more about it. So you've mentioned ACEs science a couple of times since we started this. So how do you actually define ACEs science?
So ACEs science is 5 parts. So there's the epidemiology of ACEs, which is the ACE study. And by the way, I should say that there are the 10 ACEs that were originally looked at have been added to. So the 10 ACEs are physical and emotional abuse, sexual assault or sexual abuse, having a parent who is an alcoholic or addicted to other drugs, seeing your mother being hurt by someone else in the household, having a family member in prison. You'd be surprised at how many people had these types of ACEs that are, in a lot of communities, very normal. Experienced divorce is one, and that people think, well, how is that an ACE? And for most people, it is an experience that caused them a lot of emotional distress when they were growing up. But now other ACEs that have been added are racism, bullying, being involved with the foster care system. I think the World Health Organization has about 30 different types of ACEs. Losing a parent to deportation, there are quite a few now. So that's one part of ACEs science. The second part is the effects of toxic stress from ACEs on a kid's developing brain, because it actually damages the structure and function of children's brains. The third part is the health effects, both in terms of kids and adults, and I mentioned some of those earlier. The fourth is how this translates from generation to generation, because this can be passed on from mother to child, as well as just generation after generation after generation. It's pretty remarkable. And the fifth one is the good news part of all this, which is that the research shows that people can heal from this. The brain is very plastic, and the body wants to heal. So that's the good news. And that's also the good news in how people are implementing this in schools and in health clinics and a lot of other places that are actually helping people heal, as well as changing organizations to be, instead of re-traumatizing people, actually helping them to heal.
Hi there, this is Ike Allen, founder of AVAIYA. I wanted to take a moment and pause the Masterclass to remind you that you can experience many more teachers in the free Masterclass at avaiya.com/healing. That's AVAIYA.com/healing. If you're not currently subscribed for the Masterclass, please do so now so you can experience all the available classes in this exciting series. And now, back to the Masterclass.
Wow. So, do you have any examples of how they're using it in schools? How are they going in there and helping these children who have had these experiences?
So ironically, the first thing they do is address their own. The schools that have been most successful with this have first the administrators and the teachers look at their own ACEs, because they realize that if they don't look at what triggers them, then they can't really help the kids the way the kids need to be helped. So they look at themselves first, and then they look at the school environment and say, well, is our environment healthy and not re-traumatizing? And so, for example, a school that has, say, a lot of barriers that kids have to go through, and it's more like a prison. Well, that's not very trauma informed, and it's not really going to help those kids. In fact, it's probably going to re-traumatize them. So the school environment has to be healthy. And then the last part of it is actually the kids themselves. Is, well, how do you teach kids to self-regulate? You teach them about ACEs science in their own level of understanding. You can teach elementary school kids about this all the way up to high school, and then you tell them that, or explain to them how this all works, and they're pretty good at understanding all this. And then you can teach them how to regulate themselves, so that when they feel like they're going to when they are traumatized in some way or triggered in some way, they will understand their own reaction. And I was in I think it was a 5th grade class, and they just had a module learning about all this, and they were asked to draw what it felt like when they're triggered in some way. And there are a whole bunch of little volcanoes on drawings around the room, and then there are others that going into a dark cave, and others that were running away. It was really interesting to see the fight, flight, and freeze response that these kids were putting into visual form.
Awesome. So, okay, so self-regulate, like it's teaching the kids how to self-regulate. So since most of our viewers are adults who have dealt in the past, right, with their own adverse childhood experiences, do you have any suggestions for our viewers on how to self-regulate? And first of all, like what does it mean to self-regulate?
So first is being aware of how you're responding to a situation, and instead of reacting right away, going into fight, flight, or freeze, it's understanding, okay, I'm being triggered by this. How can I just deal with this and take a breath before I respond in some way? And so it's rather than just punching somebody out, even though you might want to feel like that, and that's only going to make this situation worse. It's taking that deep breath, counting to 10, and then responding. That takes practice, and practice comes through meditation. It also takes a healthy body, so you want to make sure you get enough sleep, because that will either make you react more if you don't get enough sleep, or keep things pretty steady if you do get enough sleep. Eating right, all these sort of things that you see all the time in these in self-help articles are all true for this.
Right. Absolutely. And I love that you tie in the body and everything with it, because it's all so connected. And I think a lot of times it seems like we miss that connection, right? Of like, well, what we're feeding ourselves and how we're exercising or not exercising and sleeping or not sleeping, all of that plays a role on all of our reactions in life. So I'm a firm believer in that.
Right.
Okay.
And I want to add one more thing. It's also understanding that ACEs are so common that 2/3 of us have at least one ACE, and probably more, because it doesn't take into account all the other ACEs that weren't measured in the ACE study itself.
Right.
So it's pretty much dollars to donuts that if you're seeing something that triggers you, or you're in a conversation where you're triggered or someone else is triggered, that they have ACEs. So if you understand that's not what's wrong with you, but what happened to you, and take that kind of attitude in any interaction you have, you have a better shot of having healthy interactions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's so helpful to get that. Like when we get it for ourselves, at least for me, then I'm able to see if I see someone else outside of me reacting a certain way, I can have more compassion, as in like they're reacting to something from the past more than likely than they're reacting to me, or they're reacting to that car that cut them off, or whatever, right? Like
Right.
an altercation at the dog park that happened the other night, just like just things, things come up. But then, yeah, having a much more holistic perspective, I think makes it so much easier for at least my experience of, like not reacting, but also, yes, being compassionate towards others who are also may or may not even be aware of this information, right?
Exactly. And I know in my own journey that I if I look back on my teens and 20s and 30s and even 40s, I was pretty much just like that ball in the ping pong, pinball machine,
Yes.
just reacting, never really, and not understanding why that things were happening the way they were happening. So I think that this is important work for us to become healthy, and for our organizations to become healthy, because we are, after all, our organizations. And if we don't make those changes in ourselves, they aren't going to happen anyplace else.
Right.
And the school, as the example that I gave you, is a perfect example of that. But it works in any organization, whether it's a business or a church or whatever. It's the same, and people are doing that work.
Right. That's awesome. Okay. So let's shift gears for a minute. I like asking this question because one of the things that always comes up for me as, relating to childhood trauma, and I know a lot of people have issues with security and safety. They may obviously not have felt very secure and safe as a child, and therefore as an adult, they might really want to control things, or just really have that lack of feeling safe and secure. So do you have any advice or suggestions for everyone watching right now on how to feel more safe and secure in their lives?
So there's a couple of ways that can go when you don't feel safe and secure. Ironically, most people think, well, you just isolate, and certainly a lot of people do, and that's not healthy either. But another way that people go is they have no boundaries. And so they're constantly recreating their unsafe childhoods because that's all they know. Mm-hmm. So to change that, you really have to change yourself and understand your own ACEs, and your own journey through this. And because that is, more than anything, will help you open up to how you need to heal and how you can heal so that you can feel safe and secure. But I have witnessed so often people who say, well, I don't understand how I got in that situation. I don't understand why I was hurt. And they often will blame others. And it really starts here first. And once you do that work, then you can start to be more aware of your environment, whether it's a physical environment or an emotional environment, and start having more tools so that you can choose more wisely. A lot of people will say, well, when they see people who aren't safe for themselves or for others, and they say, well, what's wrong with you? Can't you see that? But that goes back to with the what's wrong with you piece. If you don't grow up with this knowledge that's provided to you by your parents or your caretakers, you are not going to be able to live in a healthy way. Mm-hmm. So and if you don't get it, you don't know that you don't have it.
Yes.
So.
Yeah. And that's what this event is all about. And I want everybody to create the awareness for themselves, become aware of your triggers, your, you know, boundaries you've set or you haven't set. Are you isolating? Are you, you know, not, you know, all those kinds of things are going to help you at least, you know, be able, I think, right, awareness is the first step to changing anything. We have to know that it's right. Why am I reacting this way? Oh, it's because of what happened to me as a child. So I love it. Okay, so we talked about security and safety. How about how can adverse childhood experiences affect our adult relationships? And I like to tie in the romantic relationships here because so many people, right, we're triggered by our partners, and it's such a place where a lot of that stuff can come up. So how do you think the childhood traumas and stuff affect our romantic adult relationships?
They have everything to do with our adult relationships. I don't know that there's anything that they don't touch because, you know, you model pretty much what you learned as a child in your adult relationships. And if you learned unhealthy or harmful or self-harmful behaviors, you're going to keep doing that until someone says, this really isn't working. A good example is a domestic violence prevention program that integrated ACEs science. And the way they did this was, I thought, just brilliant. Instead of blaming the mostly women in this shelter for what they had experienced and getting involved with, you know, that kind of person, they said, well, you just grew up without the tools that you needed. Your man picker is broken. Mm-hmm. And that was just like, oh, well, that's not blaming me. That's not shaming me. That's just saying I didn't get the tools I needed when I was growing up to have a healthy relationship. Mm-hmm. So once the people at the shelter, the women at the shelter learn this, they go, oh, okay, well, I want to change that now. And it was freeing for them to do that. And they were more engaged in how to learn how to have healthy relationships than to learn first how to have a healthy relationship with themselves before they would have a healthy relationship with anybody else. Mm-hmm. So that's pretty much at the root. I mean, it sounds so simple, but the science shows that that's the case.
Right.
Hi, it's Ike again. I wanted to remind you once more that you can experience many more teachers in our free masterclass at AVAIYA.com/healing. That's AVAIYA.com/healing. If you're not currently subscribed for the masterclass, please do so now so you can experience all the available classes in this exciting series. And now, back to the masterclass.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, I love that. Thank you for sharing the story, the man picker, the woman picker, whatever, right? Like, yeah, if we're not taught that, then of course we're not going to know that. Like, we're going to default to whatever we grew up with. So it makes perfect sense. And I think that again goes back to like self-compassion. It's like, don't beat yourself up for not having those tools as a kid. You weren't given them. It is what it is, right? But now you can have the tools and now you can, you know, do something with it. So I love it. So I'd love to ask you a little bit about forgiveness. Now, this right, this word in and of itself, I think might, I don't know if it scares people or it's a big word, right? Like, do you think forgiveness is important in our healing, right? If we had, God, any number of horrible things happen to us, how do you think forgiveness plays a role in our healing?
I think it's really important. And before I learned about ACEs, ACEs science, I had a very hard time forgiving, and I couldn't figure out why, because there's been so much written on it, and some of it seems so logical, but I really didn't grok it until I learned about ACEs science, and I talked with a lot of people who were implementing it in a lot of different sectors, including the faith-based sector. And one of the four main things that I think are part of forgiveness are ACEs science really helped me understand those 4 things, so that I could understand forgiveness. As one is, you're not born bad. You're born this wonderful, happy, healthy, for the most part, baby, and you're open to the world for everything. So you're not born bad. You have the things that you had no control over, anything that happened to you when you're a child. No control. And that's interesting, because you'll meet a lot of people in their 50s, 60s, 70s who say, oh yeah, I caused my parents' divorce. And it's like, no, you didn't. That's impossible. You were a kid. You have no control over anything that happened to you when you're a kid. And the third part is that however you coped was appropriate, given that you weren't given any healthy responses to the trauma that you were experiencing. And so everything you did was a normal reaction to abnormal circumstances. And in those reactions, they may have been harmful, but they helped you cope with these horrible things that were happening. Mm-hmm. And they were appropriately used to cope, because otherwise you'd kill yourself. I mean, there's no 2 ways about it. But the last piece of that is that when you understand all those parts, then you understand I can change. Mm. And so there isn't that self-blame. So forgiveness is first forgiving yourself for what you experienced. And if you had no control of it, of course you can forgive yourself. And then forgiving others is the same steps, because they also experienced those things that brought them to where they are. And so, for people, for example, who've experienced sexual abuse at the hands of of a relative, which is how most people experience sexual abuse, dollars to donuts, those people who abused them were themselves abused in some way, not necessarily sexual abuse, but some other way, so that this just gets carried forward until we can stop it. And certainly forgiveness of ourselves and others is key to stopping that.
Absolutely. Thank you. That was beautiful. I love that. And how that you're tying it right back to ACEs and how that's helped you, right, see those different four different pieces. That was beautiful. So as we're winding down in time, Jane, I want to ask you one other thing. So if you had like one piece of advice to give to our viewers right now on how they could, get started in the healing journey, what would that be?
Learn about ACEs science. Kind of a logical answer.
Yeah.
I have to say that I have run into so many people. I have teachers, principals. I just talked with 2 internists at a local hospital a couple weeks ago who said, I've been doing everything wrong in how I've been treating my patients, but now I'm changing what I'm doing. It's just remarkable that opens the door to so much understanding, not only of yourself, but other people and how the world works or it doesn't. So that would be my main advice.
Awesome. And again, everybody, there's 2 buttons below this video. One takes you over to ACEs Connection and the other to ACEs Too High. So any last words you want to say about that as far as people, checking out your communities?
If you're interested in doing something, definitely join ACEs Connection. And it's just as easy as going there and clicking the join button. It's free. And you'll meet a whole lot of people doing a whole lot of interesting things.
Okay. Awesome. Thank you. Are there any last insights, anything that you want to leave everyone with before we wrap up?
Just to be kind to yourself and to others. That's the way that things will change. And I really thank you for this wonderful opportunity, Andy. This has been great.
Right. Well, right back at you. Thank you so much for doing this. And it's been my pleasure and our pleasure to have you. And thank you. Wow. For like what you've created in the world and continue to create. I'm so just thrilled and excited that you're part of this whole healing journey. So thank you for everything. All right, Jane, thank you so much. And thank you everyone for being on this journey with us and for tuning into Jane's class today. And here once again is to your journey to healing from childhood trauma. Bye, everybody. Hey everyone, I just wrapped up a class with Jane Stevens. She talked about what do ACEs have to do with childhood trauma, everything. She is the founder and publisher of ACEs Connection, and ACEs is Adverse Childhood Experiences, for those of you who didn't know that before this class. I learned so much from Jane, and what an amazing woman for creating this organization, for all of the work that she does in the world to bring awareness to adverse childhood experiences and how the science affects all aspects of our lives. The different experiences we have as children affect our relationships, how we interact in the world, our success in life, obviously things like our happiness, our physical health, our mental health, so many different things. And I'm just so honored to be able to connect with Jane and have her be a part of this event with us. So a couple of take-home messages. When we talked about how Jane defines ACEs science, she talked about there being 5 parts to this, and I won't go into great detail, but she talked about number 1 being the epidemiology, number 2 being the effects of toxic stress on children's brains, so that there is actually a physical effect on children's brains when we experience these different adverse events as children. Health effects on children as well as adults later on. So I know we've had other people talking in this event around how these experiences that we experience as a child actually can affect our health later in life. Also how these experiences translate from generation to generation, right? They are passed on. This is something that is an ongoing journey of experiences. And the last thing that she mentioned is the good news, as she said, right, is research shows that people can heal. The brain is plastic. So there are things that we can do. There are exercises, there are tools, there are tips, many of which she went through today, that can help you really change your brain, rewire your brain. Your brain is plastic. So some of the things she talked about, like the importance of self-regulation, right? This is really how do we react to our life and how do we regulate ourselves, right? So if we are triggered by something that is really a trigger of the past, your relationship with your father, your mother, your brother, your sister, whoever, and you actually get triggered by someone in your today life, right? So it's bringing back memories from the past. So self-regulation, she recommended to help us with this, is meditation, making sure you're taking care of your physical body, your mental body, right? Getting enough sleep, taking a deep breath. If you are inclined to react in a specific moment, taking a breath, right? Taking a step back. Can you create a space between the trigger and your reaction, or how you are going to respond to what's happening? And this takes a ton of practice, like she said, and it is something that I am working on every day in addition to, you guys. So it's not something that is an overnight thing, right? This is a practice. How can we create that space and not react to our life, but respond to our life, to regulate our responses in life? So also eating right, exercising, all of the different things you can do to take care of your physical, emotional, and mental body so that you are self-regulating. So many other things. I hope that you take advantage of connecting with Jane through ACEs Connection, through ACEs Too High, and really taking a look at these organizations and what education they're bringing to the world, and perhaps you're inspired to be a part of that. So I highly recommend you check those out. Thanks again so much for tuning in, and we'll see you on the next class. Bye, everybody.